Previously, we saw how we can initiate fetch, then return back content on a promise. And there's also other ways to write this as well. So this was one format that you could use. Okay, let's comment this one out, and I'm going to show you there's actually another way to write this as well. So what we did here is that we were returning that response text. So there are different ways that you might see this written. So this one is still fetching that URL. So it always starts with just entering in that parameter where we're getting the URL, and then it's got the promises. So then we're getting that function, we're doing a response, but instead of doing a return on the response, we can just chain it together with another promise here that when the response text comes in, then we can initiate the rest of our function. Let's also add in the closing brackets. So we need a curly bracket and a rounded bracket. So let's save that and let's see what happens. So refresh, and you see you're still getting that content being returned back. So the way that it's being written, slightly different because we're not closing off the promise, we're just chaining it together with another one. And then of course you can have all of that functionality there the same way. So that's another way to write it. Also, let's go back, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about the response information. So we've got the headers, so we've got some header information, and we know that we saw that we can get this response information back as an object. So let's go back, and we're going to revert it back to the way that it was. So we're returning back that response text, and then this is going to be actually sitting in the other promise. So it's just a matter of really moving some of the brackets around. And let's try that out, make sure it's working. So everything is still working as it was. So the other thing that I want to show you within this lesson is a little bit more information about what is contained within that response object. So let's console log that response out and save it. And we can see that within the response, we saw earlier too that we had a bunch of information there. So you can actually log this information out if you want, and you can make use of it. So we've got within the headers, there is some useful information there. So if we want to find out within the headers, we could check to see what type of content type is contained within the headers. And that information is there as well. So let me show you how to get that. So you could do headers and get. So we see that within headers, we do have get. And then within here, we can get some information that's contained that we don't readily easily see here. But we can use the get method, and we can get content dash type. So that's one of the values that we can pick up. So we can see that it's text, plain text. There's also, we can get the date of it as well. So that's another useful parameter that within your coding you might be able to make use of. So date, so we refresh. We see that we get the date that the request was made. We can also just do the response, and we can get the type of the response as well. So that information was already sitting, so we don't have, you need any special methods. So it's a basic type. And there's more information about all of these that's available within the Mozilla Developer Network. So you can see here that this is just that same basic request that we made. So that was just a sampling of some of the information that's contained within that response. And there's another one too that's another useful one that you should always try to include within your fetch, and that's checking to see if there's errors. So you can do a catch at the end of that. So just chain it together and do .catch. And save format, so function. And we're just grabbing any errors that might be coming up. And we can log those errors out into the console, and the number of different things that we can do with that error. So this error will fire off if, for instance, you try to fetch a file that doesn't exist. We see that cannot get simpled text because we added the D there. We also get the JavaScript error that we're not able to find it, but we also get an error back within the catch. And that's also really useful because that basically means you can run a function if you do catch an error, and you can actually do something with it and continue with the script. So it's always a good idea to include the catch in case you do encounter any errors. You'll be able to see them within your console and obviously fix them. So what we wanted to do here is we wanted to grab this URL. So let's do that. We'll replace simple text with that value, refresh, and see what happens. So there we go. So we're actually getting back, and we see that the content type, this time it's application JSON. So it's able to distinguish and determine that this is JSON. There's null, so it's not actually returning the date. The type, so it's course. So that basically is across domains. So it's able to detect that. And then, of course, we're still getting that response text. So this time, if instead of text, we do JSON, because we know it's a JSON object, watch what happens. So we hit get joke, and boom, right away, we don't have to parse out that JSON anymore. We already have it within a JSON format. And at this point, it should be fairly familiar for you, coming from the last lesson, what we can do with this object and how we can output it into our page. So I want you to take care of that and pause the video and update it so that's outputting in your page. And I'll show you how to do that as well coming up. So now that we know that we can return it back as JSON format, we know that this promise over here is where we take our action. So we're passing it in as text. So maybe it might be a good idea to update this and say JSON. And now let's do the same thing that we did in the earlier lesson, where we do document and query selector and grab our output element and update that inner HTML. Now let's do HTML, and we'll do the same thing that we did earlier, where we built out that variable HTML. And you could use let as well. Fetch is working, then you should be fine with using let. And we'll update this to const. So we'll set that HTML, and let's do something similar to what we did before, where we have a div, and then we have an image, source, close that one off. And then here, we'll just output whatever that value is that we want to make use of, and we can close off the div at this point. So we've got it, everything within JSON. So we had JSON value, and then this one is, and within here, so it's not JSON value, but it was, so let's try that out. Or it should be icon URL. Let's try that out. Refresh, get joke, and there we go. So now we've done it within another way of getting our AJAX calls using fetch and returning back, retrieving that data, and then making use of that data within our web page. So go ahead, try this out for yourself. And next lesson, I'll show you even more things that you can do with fetch. So that's coming up.